Dry Creek was the kind of town that didn't make the maps. It sat crooked between two dying hills, wind blowing through it like a ghost that had forgotten to move on. The main street was a stretch of dust and splintered boards, flanked by buildings that leaned as though they were tired of standing. A rusted sign swung outside the saloon, its paint nearly gone, the words barely legible. The Copper Spur. The door creaked open that morning to reveal a man who filled the doorway like a mountain blocks the sun. He was broad-shouldered, quiet. His shirt sleeves rolled past wrists that looked built for breaking iron. His name was Elias Ward. No one knew where he'd come from, and no one dared ask. He didn't speak much, only nodded when spoken to. And when he did speak, his voice carried the kind of stillness that made people lean in to hear. The locals were quick to judge. In towns like Dry Creek, strangers were conversation fuel. By noon, every man nursing a whiskey had a theory about the new saloonkeeper. Some kind of drifter, said a ranch hand, leaning on the counter. Too big to move fast. Probably ran from somewhere. Or got run off. Someone else chuckled. Elias just kept cleaning glasses, slow and steady. His hands were scarred, deep, old scars like lightning marks across thick skin. There was something patient about him, like a man used to wading through storms. But the townsfolk didn't see patience. They saw weakness. By the third day, the talk had turned cruel. Laughter followed him when he walked to fetch water. A boy even tossed a pebble at his boots, daring him to react. Elias didn't. He only gave the boy a look, a quiet, unreadable one, and went back to work. That was how it was in Dry Creek. The quiet ones got tested. The McGraw gang rode in that afternoon, stirring up more dust than the wind ever could. 5 men, loud and lawless, with faces baked hard by sun and sin. Their leader, Cole McGraw, had the grin of a man who liked the sound of his own cruelty. They were the kind who took what they wanted and laughed about it later. Cole pushed open the saloon doors like he owned the place. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, eyes scanning the room. New face behind the bar. "What happened to old Jake?" "Jake sold the place," Elias said quietly. "Sold it, huh?" Cole grinned, stepping closer. "You mean you scared him off with that pretty face of yours?" His men snickered. Elias didn't answer. He set a glass down and poured whiskey for a miner who avoided eye contact. Cole leaned on the counter, close enough that Elias could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Ain't you gonna ask who we are?" "I don't keep names," Elias said simply. The laughter from the gang was sharp. Cole slapped the counter hard enough to spill whiskey. "You hear that, boys? Don't keep names. What kind of saloon man don't keep names? You too simple for it, big fella." Elias wiped the counter, his movements unbothered. "You break it, you pay for it." The words were calm, but they made Cole's grin tighten. He reached for the bottle, pouring himself another drink without asking. "Sure, I'll pay." He threw a silver coin across the counter. It clattered to the floor. "Go fetch, saloon man." The laughter filled the room again. A few townsfolk, too scared to intervene, pretended to mind their own drinks. Elias looked at the coin on the floor, then at the gang. Slowly, he bent down, picked it up, and placed it back on the counter. "You dropped it," he said. Cole stared at him for a long second. The room went still. Then, with a sneer, he reached across the counter and knocked over the whiskey bottle, glass shattering across the floor. The noise startled the piano player in the corner, who stopped mid-tune. Cole laughed. "Oops. Looks like you'll have to clean that too." Elias didn't move for a moment. His eyes lingered on the shards, glinting like amber in the light. Then he reached for a rag and began to sweep the glass aside. The movement was slow, methodical. Too calm for the moment. It made the laughter falter a little. Behind the gang, an old rancher sitting near the window muttered, "Don't wake the mountain if you don't know what sleeps in it." No one paid him any mind. When Elias straightened, he looked at Cole with that same unchanging calm. "You done?" Cole blinked, then barked another laugh. "You got a mouth after all." "Yeah, I'm done, big man. For now." He turned to his men. "Let's ride, boys. We'll be back tomorrow. Maybe then we'll see if this fella's got any bite behind that quiet bark." The gang spilled out into the street, their laughter echoing off the dry boards. Inside, the silence they left behind felt heavier than the heat. Elias stood still for a long time. The patrons kept their eyes down. He picked up another glass and began to polish it, slow circles catching the light. His reflection looked back at him from the glass, eyes that had seen too much, a face lined with things left unsaid. That night, Dry Creek slept under a sky stretched wide and pale. The saloon lights burned low, throwing long shadows across the floor. Elias stepped outside, the boards creaking under his boots. The moon hung sharp and cold above the desert ridge. He walked to the edge of town, where the wind hummed through the mesquite. In his hands, he carried an old rifle, cracked along the stock, rust creeping down the barrel. He aimed it toward the dark horizon, shoulders squared, breathing slow. For a moment, he was back there again, in that canyon years ago, the air thick with smoke and screams. The weight of the gun steady in his hands, the world narrowed to the faint shimmer of heat and the shape of a man far away. He squeezed the trigger, and memory thundered through the night like distant lightning. Now there was only silence, and the faint echo of who he used to be. Elias lowered the rifle and looked toward the sleeping town. The wind caught his coat, carrying dust across his boots. He whispered something the wind swallowed whole, then turned and walked back toward the faint light of the copper spur, the place where the past was starting to wake again. The next night came on the heels of a hot, restless wind that rattled every shutter in Dry Creek. Dust hung over the town like a curtain, dimming the moonlight into a copper haze. Inside the copper spur, the lamps burned low, throwing amber light over a scattering of faces, miners, cowhands, and the same tired souls who drank to forget the sun. Elias Ward worked behind the counter with quiet precision, his big hands steady as he poured and wiped, poured and wiped. The door swung open with a crack, and the laughter rolled in before the men did. The McGraw gang had returned. Boots slammed against the floorboards as the outlaws pushed through the haze, their spurs jingling, their smell of sweat and whiskey cutting through the stale air. Cole McGraw, red-eyed and grinning, lifted his hat to the room like a man greeting an audience. "Well, look here, boys," he drawled. "Our giant's still polishing glasses. Ain't he a fine decoration? Like a bear tamed for show." The room went quiet except for the low hum of the ceiling fan that barely stirred the heat. Elias didn't look up. He finished pouring a drink and slid it down the bar. "Big Mule," one of the gang barked. "Hey, Big Mule, how's business? You learned to talk yet? Or still grunting in them dreams?" Laughter cracked like gunfire. Elias set the glass down, the faint clink of it somehow louder than the laughter. "Maybe he don't talk, 'cause his brain's too small," said another. "Head that big, and not a word worth saying." Cole smirked, taking a seat at the bar, his boots kicking the lower rail. "Pour me something fine. Barrel man, make it quick." Elias filled a glass, slid it across without a word. The outlaw caught it mid-slide and took a long swallow. "You're obedient. I like that. I was worried we broke you yesterday." A soft voice rose from behind the counter. Clara, the saloon's young helper, maybe 16, freckles dusting her cheeks, courage flickering in her eyes like a candle in wind. "Leave him alone," she said, voice trembling but clear. "He's done nothing to you." The laughter came again, crueler this time. "Done nothing? Girl, that's the problem," Cole said, leaning close enough that she could smell the sour liquor on his breath. "He just stands there, big and dumb. Makes me itch to see what it takes to wake him up." Elias turned his head slightly. "Clara," he said, quiet and calm. "Go on now. There's no need." "But Mr. Ward." "Go," he said again, softer. She froze, then backed away, the tray trembling in her hands. Cole slapped the counter. "Now that's sweet. The big man's got manners. Tell you what, Barrel Man, serve us another round, and then show us how a giant dances." One of his men laughed. "Yeah, make the ox dance." Elias poured their drinks in silence. He set the bottle down and leaned slightly on the counter, looking at Cole for the first time that night. His eyes weren't angry. They were something else. Tired, deep and still as the canyon before dawn. "I don't dance," he said. "Then you'll learn," Cole replied, grinning. He rose from his stool, gun belt shifting. You think I'm asking? The tension was a live thing in the air now. Even the piano player stopped pretending to play. The gang's hands drifted near their revolvers, not to draw, just to remind everyone that they could. Elias didn't move. His voice came low. You boys drink what you came for, then be on your way. Cole stared at him for a long, dangerous second, then burst out laughing. Fine, fine. You got grit, big man. I like you. You'll serve us yet. He turned to his men. Play something lively. We'll make our own entertainment. They hollered and stomped, knocking glasses, spilling whiskey, making a spectacle of themselves until the night felt suffocated by their noise. Elias kept to his corner, fixing what they broke, his patience stretched thin as glass. Outside, under the awning's shadow, an old man leaned against the hitching post, listening to the ruckus. His name was Jonas Pike. Once, he'd been the best shot in 3 territories, until a stray bullet took his eye. The years had worn him down to skin and bone, but not his memory. He spat tobacco into the dust and squinted through the window. Something about the way Elias stood caught him. A straight spine, broad shoulders that didn't flinch under mockery, hands that never trembled even when insult turned dangerous. Jonas's throat went dry. He whispered to the young ranch hand beside him, "That ain't no saloon man." The boy frowned. "What you mean?" Jonas's good eye glinted. "That's the long gun from Devil's Ridge. I'd bet what's left of my teeth on it." The name hung like a whisper between them. Long Gun, the ghost story told around campfires. 10 years back, when gangs ran unchecked through the borderlands, there'd been a man who hunted them from the cliffs. Could drop an outlaw at 300 yards, wind or no wind, without blinking. Some said he fought for the law. Others said he fought for vengeance. Either way, when he vanished, the killing quieted, and folks slept easier not knowing where he'd gone. Inside, the gang's laughter reached a fever pitch. Cole stood, swaying slightly, gun in hand. "Let's have a toast," he shouted, and fired his revolver into the ceiling. Dust rained down from the rafters. "To the big mule. To our gentle giant. Tell us a story about them big, slow days behind this bar." Elias looked at the hole in the ceiling, the smoke curling upward. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried across the room. "I've told all the stories I need to, son." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Cole's laughter came again, hollow and sharp. "You're full of sayings, old man. I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe then we'll find that temper hiding under your skin." He pointed a finger at him like a gun. "You best have a smile waiting." The gang finished their drinks, loud and stumbling, their boots hammering the floor as they left. The door swung shut behind them, and silence rushed back in like air filling a vacuum. Elias stayed still for a moment, then exhaled slow, like a man who'd been holding his breath too long. His hand, steady through all the noise, trembled as he reached for the broom. He swept the glass from the floor, each motion deliberate, like he was trying to erase the night itself. Clara came out from the back room, eyes red. "You shouldn't let them do that," she whispered. Elias didn't look at her. "There are worse things than being mocked." "What kind of worse things?" He paused, resting both hands on the counter. "The kind that make you forget who you are." Outside, the wind kicked up again, dragging dust through the cracks of the old saloon. Elias bolted the doors, the metal clicking in the quiet. He stood for a long time staring at the dark wood, the reflection of the lamp flickering across his face. Then he moved toward the back room, where a small table sat beneath a single oil light. On that table lay a photograph, faded, corners worn soft by touch. A woman with kind eyes, a little boy no older than 6. They stood in front of a cabin, sun on their faces. Elias sat down and traced a finger along their outlines. The room was still except for the ticking of the wall clock. He remembered the gunfire, the smoke, the way their laughter had vanished into the echo of his rifle. He had sworn that day, as he buried them beneath the cottonwoods, that he'd never lift a weapon again. His breath shook. He turned the photo face down, unable to look any longer. The morning broke quiet, too quiet for Dry Creek. A storm had crawled across the horizon during the night, but left no rain, only heat and silence. Dust lay thick over the road that wound out of town toward the canyons. A single wagon creaked along that road, a rancher and his wife heading back from the mill, their mules swaying under the weight of feed sacks. They never saw the riders coming until the first shot cracked the air. The McGraw gang came down off the ridge like wolves, guns barking, laughter echoing through the open plain. The wagon jerked sideways. The rancher tried to reach for his rifle, but fell before his hand touched the stock. His wife screamed once before another shot cut the sound in half. The echo lingered a moment, then faded into wind and the metallic cry of crows. By noon, word had spread through Dry Creek like wildfire. Folks gathered in front of the sheriff's office, faces pale, voices trembling, fury simmering beneath fear. Sheriff Tate stood on his porch, hat in hand, eyes darting everywhere but at the crowd. He was a thin man with a gut of guilt and a badge that had lost its shine. "You gonna do something, Tate?" An old miner barked. "They're out there killing decent folk." The sheriff swallowed hard. "Ain't that simple. McGraw's got near 15 men. You want me to get half the town killed?" The crowd murmured, some with anger, others with resignation. Everyone knew the truth. McGraw ran this territory. The law was just a word that blew away in the wind. Elias Ward heard it all from inside the copper spur. The doors were open, the air heavy with dust and the scent of old whiskey. He stood behind the counter, hands still, listening as men whispered the news, like a prayer no one wanted to say aloud. Then the door burst open. Clara stumbled in, face streaked with tears, hair undone, her breath coming in gasps. "They took him," she cried. "They took my brother, Tommy. They said they'd hang him if anyone followed." Elias stepped out from behind the counter, his shadow long and still against the wall. "Where?" he asked. "They were headed toward the canyon, near the old mining trail," she said, her voice shaking. "Sheriff won't go after them. He says it's suicide." Elias looked down at the counter, his fingers spreading against the wood. His knuckles whitened. The wood groaned, then cracked beneath the pressure. When he lifted his hand, splinters fell like dust. He took a slow breath. "Some men," he said softly, "only learn when the wind turns against them." Clara didn't understand. She only watched as he walked to the far corner of the saloon and knelt on the floor. With one solid motion, he pried up a board and reached into the darkness beneath. When he stood again, he held a long, worn case wrapped in canvas and tied with old leather. He set it on the bar and untied it carefully, almost reverently. The flap fell open to reveal a Sharps .50 rifle, dark steel gleaming even under the low light. Every piece of it had been cleaned, oiled, and loved. The kind of weapon that didn't just kill, it remembered. Clara stepped closer, trembling. "You said you'd never." "I said I'd never start a fight," he interrupted gently. "Didn't say I'd never end one." Outside, the town watched as Elias saddled his horse. He moved with the quiet rhythm of a man returning to something he once knew too well. Jonas Pike stood by the hitching post, hat low, voice rough with awe. "Knew it," he muttered. "Knew that ghost was still breathing." Elias swung up into the saddle. The sun caught the silver of his rifle as he tied it to the scabbard. For a long moment he sat there, staring down the empty street, the faces of Dry Creek watching in silence. Then he nudged the reins, and the horse started forward, hooves thudding against the hard-packed earth. He rode west, toward the red cliffs and the broken lands beyond. By late afternoon, the air was thick with dust and the smell of sage. The canyon yawned ahead like the open mouth of a grave. He found them near the bend in the trail, camped by an old prospector's shack. The gang's laughter carried up the slope, wild and careless. They had the boy, Clara's brother, tied to a wagon wheel, his face bruised, his lip bleeding. McGraw and his men were passing a bottle, shooting at tin cans for sport. Elias lay flat against a ridge of rock, steadying the Sharps rifle across his knee. The world narrowed into the line of his sight, the canyon wind, the shimmer of heat, the heartbeat under his thumb. His breathing slowed. The first man went down before his bottle hit the ground. Panic tore through the camp. The outlaws scrambled for cover, shouting, firing into the rocks. The second shot came before the echo of the first had died. A man spun backward into the fire, his hat bursting into flame. "Who the hell's shooting?" one of them yelled. McGraw's voice rang out, hoarse with fury. "Spread out. Find him." But the canyon betrayed them. Sound bounced from rock to rock, the echoes lied. They fired at shadows. One by one, Elias dropped them, clean, precise, without hurry. The rifle cracked like thunder, each shot measured, final. When only a few were left, silence fell between gunfire. The survivors crouched behind boulders, shaking, whispering among themselves. One man, pale as dust, muttered, "It's him. It's the long gun from Devil's Ridge. He's come back." The name spread through the survivors like a fever. Even McGraw froze for a heartbeat before rage replaced the fear. "Ain't no ghost gonna scare me," he snarled. He grabbed the boy, pressing a revolver to his head. "You hear me, whoever you are. You show yourself, or I'll paint this dirt with the kid's blood." Elias stayed still, the rifle pressed to his shoulder. His finger rested on the trigger, but he didn't pull. His eyes moved from McGraw to the terrified boy. He could see the same fear he'd once seen in his son's eyes, the memory that had kept him awake for 10 years. He exhaled slowly, whispered, "Hold still, son." The shot came like the breaking of the sky. The bullet split the revolver clean in two, ripped it from McGraw's hand, and buried itself in the post behind him. The outlaw screamed, clutching his bleeding wrist. The boy ducked low, sobbing. Elias was already moving. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, mounted his horse, and descended the ridge. By the time the gang gathered their senses, the canyon floor was a tomb of silence. McGraw stared at the bodies scattered around him, rage burning behind his eyes. "You think this is over?" he roared into the wind. "I'll burn your whole damn town to ash." Elias paused at the edge of the canyon, the wind tugging at his coat. The sky above him darkened, clouds rolled in from the west, thick and gray, heavy with the promise of a storm. He looked back once, the outline of the fallen men blurred by dust and distance. "You should have left peace sleeping," he said quietly. He turned his horse toward town, thunder rumbling across the plains as if the heavens themselves answered him. The first drops of rain fell on the rifle steel, hissing as they touched the heat of the barrel. Dawn came bleeding red over Dry Creek, painting the sky like an open wound. The air was still, heavy with the kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. From the ridge above town came the sound of horses, many of them, hooves striking hard earth in rhythm. Then came the fire. Torches flared against the light, carried by riders thundering down the slope. The McGraw gang had come to finish what they started. Doors slammed. Curtains fell. Mothers pulled children into cellars. Sheriff Tate peeked from his window once, then sank into the shadows, clutching his useless badge. The street cleared in seconds, leaving only the wind to greet the riders. When they reached the center of town, torches burned high, their glow reflecting off gunmetal and mean faces. Cole McGraw swung down from his horse, his eyes bloodshot, his arm bound in a blood-soaked rag. Rage burned through the pain. "Ward!" he shouted, voice echoing down the empty street. "You think you can shoot my men and hide behind these walls? Get out here, you big coward." The saloon doors creaked open. Elias Ward stepped out slow, the rifle slung across his shoulder, the morning light catching the edge of its barrel. He looked calm, almost serene, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. The wind pushed at his coat, lifting dust around his boots. Behind him, the Copper Spur stood quiet, its windows boarded, its sign swinging like a pendulum. "I ain't hiding," Elias said, his voice carrying low and steady across the space between them. "You're standing in a good place to die, son." The gang broke into cruel laughter, but it didn't sound sure. Something in the way Elias stood, straight as a post, unmoving, eyes cold, made even the air hesitate. Cole smirked, though his hands trembled around his revolver. Big words for a man who pours drinks. "Let's see if you can pour blood as easy." He drew first. The world snapped. In a blink, the rifle barked once, then again, then twice more. The sound rolled across the town like thunder hitting wood. By the time the echoes faded, for men were down in the dust, guns still half drawn, faces frozen in disbelief. Cole stumbled back, eyes wide, watching his men drop like wheat before a scythe. He fired wildly, bullets splintering the saloon door, shattering glass. One round caught Elias high in the shoulder, spinning him slightly, but he didn't fall. He reloaded with slow precision, as if the pain meant nothing. Blood spread dark across his shirt, but his hands were steady. "You ain't human," Cole yelled, voice breaking. "You can't be." Elias lifted the rifle one last time. "No," he said, quiet as prayer. "Just a man who's had enough." The shot split the air. It hit the revolver clean, shattering it, sending pieces flying. And when the smoke cleared, Cole McGraw was on his knees, staring down at the red blossoming across his chest. His last words caught in his throat. The torch fell from his hand, hissing out in the dust. Silence followed. Not even the horses moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elias stood there a long while, the rifle hanging limp in his hand, blood dripping from his arm. The wind rose gently, swirling dust over the fallen men, carrying away the last of their laughter. Then came the sound of doors creaking open. One by one, the townsfolk emerged, faces pale, eyes wide. Sheriff Tate stepped forward slowly, hat in hand, voice trembling. "Dear God," he whispered, "who the hell are you?" Elias turned his head, meeting the sheriff's gaze. "Just a man who used to miss what mattered," he said. Behind him, Clara came running, skirts gathering dust, tears streaking her cheeks. She dropped to her knees beside him, reaching for his wounded arm. "You're hurt," she cried. Elias managed a faint smile. "Don't remember me for this," he said, voice fading. "Remember me for keeping you safe." She tried to speak, but the words broke apart in her throat. He touched her shoulder lightly, gentle as a goodbye, and stepped past her toward his horse. The crowd parted without a word. He mounted with quiet grace, wincing only slightly as the movement strained his wound. The rifle hung across his back, gleaming faintly in the newborn sun. For a moment, he looked down the street, the same street where men had once mocked him, where laughter had turned to fear, and fear to silence. Then he looked toward the horizon. The sun had broken through the clouds, cutting through the smoke, turning the world to gold. Elias touched the brim of his hat to Clara, then to the sheriff, and without another word, he rode away. His silhouette moved through the dust, shrinking slowly until it merged with the light. Behind him, Dry Creek stood still. The people looked at the bodies on the ground, then at the empty street, and no one spoke for a long time. Finally, old Jonas Pike limped forward, eyes glistening, voice rough. "You saw it," he murmured. "You all saw it. The long gun ain't dead after all." And from that day on, when the wind howled down from the canyon and rattled the saloon sign, the folks of Dry Creek would tell the story again. How a quiet giant came to town, how he bore his silence like a cross, and how he stood alone against the darkness that owned their land. They said he'd been a killer once, a legend of the Badlands, but that morning, he'd become something else. They buried the outlaws on the edge of town, unmarked. No one spoke their names, but the saloon door still bore the hole from Cole McGraw's bullet, and folks left it there as a reminder. When travelers passed through, they asked about the man who'd built the copper spur back up again after the fire. The old-timers would point to the empty chair at the end of the bar and say, "That's where he sat, the day before it happened." And when night fell, and the desert wind rose, some swore they could still hear the echo of a rifle crack rolling through the canyons. Steady, unhurried, true. They say peace don't come easy in the West. It rides slow, and it costs blood. But when the dust finally settled over Dry Creek, even the wind whispered one name, Elias Ward.